It's a great pleasure to welcome Johannes Reiche today for the Centre for Global Wood Security seminar, and also today we're pleased to also welcome researchers from the Centre of Earth Observation to the meeting. The Centre for Earth Observation brings together researchers from across the University of Cambridge who are interested in remote sensing applications to sustainability. And I'm not going to say too much to welcome Johannes because he's got a few slides at the start of his talk. But Johannes has had a really illustrious career based out of Wageningen, where he's currently now an associate professor. He really is probably, in my view, the world leader in detection of disturbances within tropical forests, particularly related to selective logging, and has a massive focus in his work on the Congo Basin. And that work has led to tools that are applied at global scale through Global Forest Watch, etc. So this is it's amazing work, and it's really, really impactful work. So we very much look forward to hearing your talk, Johannes, and thanks so much for agreeing to speak.
Thank you very much, David, for the introduction and also for the opportunity to present our work here today. So I'm sharing my screen, and there's many, I think, people that lead this type of work around the globe. So I am very honored by your words, but there's many, I'd say. So today I would like to talk about our work on assessing tropical forest disturbances using radar satellite data. And first of all, I would like to give a big shout out to the Wageningen radar team. A lot of the work that I'm presenting here today has credits from them, and I also would like to thank the many amazing contributors and forest actors around the globe that I had the opportunity to work together with over the past decade. But first of all, a few words about myself before I actually start with the presentation. So I work in the Netherlands at Wageningen University, but I'm originally German. David also asked me where I'm from. So I'm from central Germany, from the state of Thuringia, which is also considered the green heart of Germany. So it's very central. It's a lot of forest area, a lot of forestry also. So that's the Thuringian forest, and I'm actually a son of a forester. So my father is maybe one of the few people that will leave the earth with a positive carbon footprint, considering the amount of trees he has planted. I mean, he has also cut a lot, but I think he planted more. But we also bordering this infamous Harz Mountain area, which has seen a lot of droughts and bark beetle infestation over the past 5 years. I did my bachelor in geography at the University of Jena in Germany, and then I followed a degree in radar remote sensing at the same university, and I'm very grateful to my old professor Christiane Schmulius, who shared her passion for radar remote sensing with me. After that, I moved to Wageningen, where I did a PhD on combining actual optical and radar remote sensing to improve tropical forest monitoring. And now I'm an associate professor in the group since 2021. I'm part of a larger lab, the Geoinformation Science and Remote Sensing Lab, which actually consists of 2 shareholders, a chair for remote sensing and a chair for geoinformation science. It's quite a large group that's quite common for Wageningen. So it's about 12 assistant and associate professor, 10 lecturers, about 10 postdocs, 40 PhDs, and we have our own master program. So that's why we have such a large amount of assistant, associate professors and lecturers to support that degree, with about 50 to 60 students every year. And within this bigger group, I'm leading the radar team that primarily focus on utilizing these new and forthcoming radar data streams for assessing dynamics in forest and other ecosystems. And today I'm talking about the work that we are doing in the tropics. First of all, I give a very brief introduction on radar remote sensing for forest change monitoring for those that are not so familiar with radar remote sensing. Then I talk a little bit about the rod alerts, probably the most, let's say, famous product that came out of our group over the past years. And then other more recent work on assessing forest dynamics, talk about drivers, logging impact, and so on, and finish with an outlook and summary. So first of all, radar remote sensing. So optical remote sensing, many of us are familiar with it. Basically, what the satellites record is the reflection of the sunlight, and in case of trees, it's the very top layer of the trees. And if we have clouds, of course, we detect the clouds and we can't look through. That's one of the major advantages of radar remote sensing. Also, if we work in the tropics, because we always have cloud-free imagery, since we work with long wavelength that can penetrate through clouds, but also depending on the wavelengths, it penetrates deep inside the forest. So the signal is much more, in contrast to optical data, which is more to like photosynthetic activity, for example, biophysical parameters. Radar is much more sensitive to moisture and structure of forest. So that's also an advantage if we look at selective logging. And to complete this, LiDAR, of course, measures the full transect, vertical transect of forest, but the disadvantage is we don't have a wall-to-wall LiDAR system available. How do different radar wavelengths see trees? So I said, depending on the wavelength, it penetrates deeper inside the forest, and the wavelength actually defines the physical length of the electromagnetic wave that travels through space, and and that interacts with the objects on the ground. And the longer the wavelength, the deeper the penetration is, because there's a rule of thumb that says the length of the wavelength defines the minimum size of objects the radar starts to interact with. And for C-band, a common wavelength, that's roughly 5 centimeter. Then we have L and P-band, 27 and 70 centimeter. That means that C-band interacts with all the small twigs and leaves already. So, and that's why its penetration depth is not so deep. So the signal mainly comes from the top part of the canopy. While for longer wavelengths, it basically doesn't see these smaller objects in forest canopy. It penetrates through them and it interacts with larger objects of trees, larger branches, the main stem. That's why we also see now this new ESA mission, the biomass mission, is the first P-band mission in space. And because it basically receives a signal from the very big parts of the forest, the signal we record we can much better correlate to biomass than that of shorter wavelengths, for example, where the signal is more related to smaller elements of trees, and we don't really see whether it's a small tree or a large tree. It saturates relatively quickly. But our current workhorse still today, and the work I'm presenting, is primarily based on this. The sensor is Sentinel-1 that many of you know. It's a C-band radar, so a short wavelength radar that saturates quickly. And doesn't penetrate so deep into the forest canopy, but it was the first sensor, the first radar sensor that provided temporary dense and high spatial detailed radar observation globally and freely. There's 10-meter pixel spacing, roughly 20-meter resolution, and in the tropics we have imagery every 6 till 12 days. Here's an image of Sentinel-1 seeing deforestation patterns in Bolivia, and what we see here in very bright area is forest canopy, and dark is, so the bright area is a high signal, the dark area is a low signal, and the low signals we have, for example, over water and also over those bare soil area where we deal more with specular scattering and some surface scattering. A lot of the signal actually, because it's side-looking radar, it goes away from the sensor and we record very little, and in forest there's more scattering also to back towards the sensor. And people often associate radar with these grayscale images, but we can also make more intuitive false color composite images. Here is a false color composite of an area in Sumatra where we see palm plantations in dark green. Here we see natural forest area. Here we see mangroves. We can actually identify these inundated areas here. In purple, it's recently cut palm areas. So we can study these dynamics. We clearly see here these roads in between that are used to manage these plantations. And that's an image from 2015. And if we then see an image from 2016, we see here is also some structure, some logging roads that have started to being established. Here also a road that actually enters the forest, some degraded area in the surrounding. And then there was a large forest fire in 2017. If we go forward and backward, we can actually very impressively see the extent of this forest fire. And those are slides I use to discuss also with my students, where you really see that in this part, the forest fire follows basically the extent of this previously degraded forest. That's what we see a lot. I mean, those forests, they are usually escaped wildfires or escaped land management fires. And forests that are previously disturbed, they're more vulnerable to those fires. And that's something we do see here. With this, I'd like to, with this, I actually like to go to Sentinel data, back to more detail. So this was a bit a bird's eye view, but if we really zoom into logging areas and if we process the data correctly, we are actually able to see selective logging at a level that is unprecedented, because what we see here is really these canopy gaps. What we see here, the bright area and the dark area, is actually what we call shadow and layover, and they represent three-dimensional gaps in the forest canopy. So actually loss of the three-dimensional structure of forest. That's what it basically is. So it's canopy openings, canopy gaps that appear in the data because there's suddenly a gap, and because of this gap, this produces this shadow, and the opposite, we have a very strong scatter, is this foreshortening. So there's nothing else, this signal, there's nothing else that could have created that signal except of a loss of the three-dimensional structure of the forest. And this is quite impressive how well we can actually see those logging activities. And if we then look at an individual pixel, we see that there is a very dense time series. We see that there is quite some variation in the signal. And that is also the reason why in the past the C-band radar data, because it's so affected also by moisture conditions. So for example, if we have a bare soil area after it rained, the backscatter can be very high just because it's wet, and if it's dry again, the backscatter is low, because basically what radar interacts with is with water molecules. So meaning the more moisture there is, the more backscatter there is. And so on. So what we see, the point I want to make is there's quite some variation in the signal. And in the past, we only had a few radar images available, and that basically hindered like real change detection because we couldn't really trust the signal. But because we have so dense data available now, we are able to build confidence in the signal we are observing. Now let me get to the RUT alerts. The RUT alerts is a pan-tropical, that's a poor quality. It's a pan-tropical forest disturbance alert using Sentinel-1, and we provide weekly updates for the pan-tropics via Global Forest Watch and our own website. So the data is freely available, and it's really a law enforcement and transparency tool. So it's really a tool to support forest users in the tropics with identification of new unsustainable logging activities so they can follow up timely. The alerts, it's a radar-based alert. They're very complementary with optical alerts. I get there at the end of the RUT alert slides. And they're also fed into the Global Forest Watch integrated alerts. But let me go back to the Congo Basin where everything started. So this is the Congo Basin area, which is actually the cloudiest area in the world. So Gabon itself, it's actually the cloudiest place with the fewest optical observations, and that is an image from the group of Maryland. It's a little bit outdated, but it shows basically the cloud-free lens observation per year. And in Gabon, in Equatorial Guinea, we see that there's sometimes less than a single cloud-free observation available per year. This has improved with Sentinel-2, but still there is, particularly during the rain season, we have almost no no cloud-free images available. And that, of course, doesn't allow in those areas like to track changes in near real time solely on optical data. And also considering that often, particularly these signals from selective logging disappear very quickly, we can't fully rely on optical data. And here is actually a cloud-free time series from Planet, where we see that in February, we see that these logging roads have been started to being established, and in September, I don't know whether you can see it, we can, for the first time, we see the signal of canopy openings. I don't know whether it's clearly visible. And they're still visible in October, but in November, they start to disappear already because of quick canopy overgrowth, and the canopy gaps, they close. So we need to be very quick in detecting those. And before the radar alerts, at least in the Congo Basin, a lot of those activities were unseen. But because we have these very dense and high spatially detailed data available, we were able to, for the first time, actually track the selective logging activities in near real time. And what we see here is a typical signal from a concession where we see logging roads being established, and in a short period after the establishment of the logging roads, in many concessions, that's a year, sometimes it's only half a year, we see this signal of canopy extraction in the direct surroundings of roads. We don't detect individual trees. So what we do see here is like these larger canopy gaps. That is often the result of the extraction of individual trees plus collateral damage from some other trees that have been taken down because of that. And as I said, it's really a law enforcement tool to support law enforcement agencies in the tropics. It allowed us, besides looking at logging, also to look at other type of drivers here. For example, studying gold mining in the Republic of Congo, here very typical signature of gold mining. Also looking at smallholder agriculture, which is by far the major driver of forest disturbances in the Congo Basin. So that's very different to Southeast Asia and Brazil or South America, where deforestation is driven by commodity expansion and land speculation in South America for agricultural expansion and so on, and soy and these kind of activities. So very large scale changes. In Africa, in the Congo Basin, about 80% of the changes are due to smallholder agriculture, and that's really a process where smallholder farmers cut a piece of forest at the edge of these unfragmented pieces, plant some crops, and 2 or 3 years later the soil is extinguished and they cut the next piece of forest. And that activity really eats itself into these remaining unfragmented forests, which is a problem. And as long as we don't provide a real alternative for them and for an income, and considering that the population will, I think 3 to 5-fold until 2100 in the Congo Basin, that is a very strong threat to the Congo Basin forests. I would like to talk quickly about the value of alert integration. So that is one alert system. Maybe some of you heard about other type of alert system based on optical data. So there's the Landsat alerts that have been established in 2017, which is a Landsat-based alert, and a Sentinel-2 based alert from CLAD. So both are produced from the University of Maryland, from the team of Matt Hansen. They are optical-based systems, and those alert systems are very complementary. So the basic processing steps in those, from how those alerts are produced, they're very similar. So what they do, there's a detection, and all systems somewhat build confidence with subsequent observations that what we see in the first observation is actually true. So whether we can confirm that a disturbance we have detected is indeed true. The difference in limitations, they stem actually from the sensor characteristics and the related detection abilities. So for example, difference between optical and radar, where optical systems are very strong in detecting, for example, large patches of forest. Radar systems sometimes have problem, these large areas, because of a strong drop of the photosynthetic activities. It's very straightforward to detect, but sometimes, and in many cases, there is remaining forest structure, so stems that remain on the ground, or in case of a wildfire, a lot of the forest remains. That is very difficult for C-band radar with the short wavelengths to detect, because that remaining structure causes the radar signal not to change. But if we look, for example, at these very small disturbances that cause a radar shadow, this radar shadow effect, right, C-band radar can detect it very well, and also in cloud-covered region, radar can do very well. So by combining these alert systems, we are able to detect changes much faster and with a higher confidence. Because if two systems, even though the individual system hasn't yet confirmed something with high confidence, if two or multiple systems that are produced with different satellite imagery, or that are based on different satellite imagery, indicate that there is a disturbance at a location, you can be immediately actually very confident that the disturbance indeed is true. We have also invested in open source tools. So one of our probably most used open source tool is in Google Earth Engine package for generating analysis-ready Sentinel-1 backscatter data, which is the backbone also for the RUT alerts. So the method itself is very simple of the RUT alerts, but the properly processing this data is the most important part of the workflow. So that is a paper and a software package we have released openly, and then it has been cited 350 times already since, I think, 3 years. So many people use it. So we are very happy about it, that we can contribute it to the community. We have also implemented the RUT method in the FAO CPAL system to accommodate some requests by countries that would like to produce their own national alerts. And also we developed this alert integration tool that basically does the alert integration. So it allows people not just to reproduce these Global Forest Watch integrate alerts that we have developed, but also to integrate their own alerts. For example, a nationally based alert that can then be integrated with whatever, the CLUT alerts or the RUT alerts. Okay, now I'm getting to the second part of the presentation, is more recent work on assessing forest disturbance dynamics. The first example is work from a video who's a postdoc who's now, I think, at JPL still, who has combined the RUT alerts with CCI biomass, so with a biomass product to estimate local carbon loss across the Congo Basin forest. But the majority of this work, actually of this paper, was to develop an extensive uncertainty framework that propagates the uncertainties of the different input data streams. But where I actually want to get is when we zoom in, and here on the left side, you actually see the logging concession again that I showed, and you look in the direct neighborhood to it, you see here smallholder agriculture actually. And I would like you to look at the seasonality of those. So where we see for logging, it's more consistently throughout the year. There's a little bit of seasonality where we see this very strong seasonality in smallholder agriculture, which is typical because they cut basically a piece of forest in the dry season, and then something is grown, and for the rest of the year nothing happens, and only a year later the next piece of forest in the dry season is cut. And that initial work really showed us also the importance of understanding the drivers of forest disturbances. And now we are able to do that actually not on an annual level, but actually looking, monthly or weekly, we see the disturbance. So we can actually look at driver seasonality, something we weren't really able to do before because all products, they were annual products. So in recent years, we spent quite some time in extending our work in detecting disturbances beyond just detecting the location and time of disturbance, but also trying to understand what caused those disturbances. And that is work that is led here by Bart Slachter, who has first developed a method to detect different, so it's basically to label the type of direct driver of these disturbances into a set of classes. So we have agriculture, road, selective logging, mining, wildfire, flooding, and we can see here how nicely we can separate those. And we have now, this is a figure from initial work from a 2023 paper, but now we have expanded it to the pantropics. work that is in review that allows us now to actually spatially explicit track these drivers at a monthly level. And what we see here is really this complexity that we are able to unravel of different small-scale drivers. So we see really roads next to this large-scale agriculture. We see here selective logging. We see mining in these areas. So something that is often mixed in these aggregated driver products. So we have recently also seen a 10 and a 1 kilometer driver product for the Pentropics, but a lot of these small-scale drivers are then mixed, and we only see the dominant drivers. And really doing it explicit, so patch explicit, allows us to unravel those. And it also allows us, what we call it, maybe to decode the temporal sequence of these drivers. So on the left side, we see an example where mining is mixed with agriculture, and we see actually here, this is, if we go through time, we see that in 2020 there was a lot of mining activities, but that stops, and we see again the strong seasonality of smallholder agriculture in the dry season. And on the right side, which is quite interesting, is we see an example where logging activities precede a fire. So we indeed see these logging activities in 2020, 2021. It's not very perfectly detected, because what we basically do is we label the integrate alerts, so the rut and the glut alerts, and here the detection of these original work didn't work perfectly. But what we see is that those happened first, and then at the end of 2024, the fire actually came, and so we are now able, really, a lot of these activities happen within 1 year, and only looking at annual data wouldn't allow us to disentangle some of these processes. Let me show if yeah, this is actually something I would like to. So I also would like to point out the work from Robert Masolele, who's a postdoc in our group, who worked on, so Bart, if we go back to Bart's work that focused on drivers that we can immediately detect. So something like roads, mining, it's something we can immediately see almost in near real time, but there's really a set of drivers where we need some time. So land use following deforestation, so commodities where we need quite some time after the disturbance happened to understand actually what was planted, for example. So whether a forest was cleared for cocoa or whether a forest was cleared for oil palm. And this is work he did across Africa to basically label the Hansen forest loss changes into a large set of commodities. Then there is work on post-disturbance structures. So what I said is that the radar signal interaction with post-disturbance structure is quite complex. And in particular with short wavelength radar with C-band, if there's remaining structure, as we see here, we have sometimes difficulties to detect it. It's very hard sometimes to get a clear signal. Here, for example, forest fire, where the fire went through, but there's still a lot of remaining structure. So that poses challenges for disturbance detection, but it also provides opportunities for disturbance characterization. And there's a first slide here showing actually how in the mapping of changes, in the timely mapping, we try to overcome that by introducing radar texture, where we see here, this is like the VV polarization and VH polarization. So people that are familiar with radar, there are two different bands, but they both show the same trend. So what we see in the backscatter signal here on top, this is the backscatter signal, so the signal we also used for the rudder alerts. We see that basically we only start detecting. Here's forest, here's basically forest is cut, and it's sometimes typical that they pile up these remaining debris and the structure on piles before they actually clean it to prepare the land for cultivation. And because here it's very easy in optical data to see, but because there's a lot of piled up structure, still forest stems, we have hard times in the radar signal to detect it. But we only start detecting it basically when it's cleared, when there's bare soil, because then there's a strong contrast. Because this is an area where we can't make use of radar shadow like in small disturbance, but this is a larger area. But if we actually introduce texture, the texture changes immediately. So using radar texture, we can actually detect the change after the forest has been locked, and even though it's piled up, the texture in the radar image changes, and that allows us actually to separate even this sequence of land management going from forest to clearing, piling up with remaining structure until actually the area is totally cleared. And Johannes Balling, he has published a paper. I'm still fascinated about it. We haven't had the time to follow up, and I think there's a lot of work still to be done. Is he worked on archetypes of fire-related forest disturbance to use this inability of C-band radar backscatter to detect disturbances where we still deal with remaining structure, to actually combine the radar time series here in blue and black with an optical time series and active fire alerts to actually temporarily, and we have it in high temporal detail, to temporarily align when the different signals actually detect an event. And here is a very common example where fire actually causes the removal of the forest, where we see that both radar and optical detect the event when also the fire detected is around the same time. So because the structure is entirely removed in this case, the signals align. But then we have also an example which is very typical for land management in many parts of the tropics, is that forest is cut, but then the fire is actually not used to, the fire hasn't caused the removal of the forest. It's only used much, much later to clear the land of remaining debris. That's very common. The forest is cut, trees are removed, there's a little bit of remaining stuff on the ground, and then just before the land is cultivated, the remaining debris is cleared with fire. And that's typical land management practice. And that's also something we are somewhat able to separate by looking at these signals through time, where we see here in the Sentinel-2 signal that the signal goes down when the forest is cleared. But there's still a little bit of remaining structure, so it is somewhat cleared, but the signal further here really drops when the structure is actually cleared. So that is also very similar to what I have shown 2 slides before in the example where I introduced the texture, and much later fire is used. But that all happens within a year or 2. So by actually looking into this very dense time series, we are now able to somewhat disentangle these processes, or maybe we call them disturbance sequences, archetypes. We can start doing that and can start separating and studying different land management practices. And the last piece of work we are doing is on tracking logging impact. So many of you are familiar with that. So selective logging, if sustainable, is actually one of the most sustainable ways of producing tropical timber, and to respond to this demand for tropical timber. But about 15 to 30% are illegal globally, and in some countries even up to 90%. So there's really a wide range of organizations and parties interested to track roads and selective logging activities and selective impact more timely. And this work led by Bart and Annie Yule, 2 PhD students in my team. And this is a repetition slide that make use also of this high spatial and temporal detail of Sentinel-1 data. And I start with the logging road work from Bart. Here's a planet image from 2020, a planet image from 2021, where we see these logging roads are being established. We also see that the major roads are quite clearly visible. Some of these side roads are not so clearly visible. If we look at 2022, we see that these processes continue, but we also see that the signal already disappears from these smaller logging roads that are not used consistently as whole roads, that they disappear quickly. And here we see an area where the alerts are not so good. We see here the combination, so that's actually the Global Forest Watch integrate alert, the combination of rut and clutter alerts. And if we now add the tree cover loss data from the University of Maryland, so the Hansen data, we see that we detect this area to some extent, but by far we are not able to really classify these logging routes. And that is the results we have produced now consistency. So with deep learning using Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 data, wall-to-wall mapping, we included some post-processing steps and vectorization. So we're really having these data vectorized at a monthly level, produced across the full Congo Basin for the last 4 years. The data is freely available. There's also an app at our website. And what we also did as part of this paper is actually look at road reopening, because that's ecologically and forest management wise quite important. So what you see in black is actually hand digitized data from Fritz Kleinschrod's work from the past, who used Landsat data to digitize roads. And if we overlap them with the new roads, we can see that in some areas there's quite a substantial amount of the work is roads that we detect now are in fact reopened roads that were established maybe 20 years ago and now are reopened for a new harvest cycle. And with this, we can start studying, for example, harvest cycling, whether they are sustainable, because in the Congo Basin for sustainable reharvesting, there should be at least like 20, 25, 30 years break between the harvest cycles. And we can study that the time period between the original opening of the roads, the first opening, and now the reopening. And what Bart has mapped for the 3 years where the data we used for the paper is that he detected much more roads than we have previously seen. 80%, roughly 80% of the roads are related to logging, and about 30% appear to be reopened. And 23% are within intact forest landscape, using this intact forest landscape data set that is highly debated, since we don't really fully understand what intact forest landscapes are. And as I said, the data is openly available. And then you will focus on timber harvest volume estimation. So first of all, she developed a method that goes beyond the ability of the RUD alerts. The RUD alerts is a pan-tropical disturbance alert that is very conservative by design, because we want to avoid commission error. So we don't want to send forest actors to the forest to areas where there is in fact no disturbance. So they are conservative by design, but she developed something that is able to much better detect logging gaps, also based on Sentinel-1 data. That is work that has just been published, and we were able to actually assess the quality of that with repeat drone-based data. And that method and that data we now use to actually correlate with forest in situ data from the Nature Conservancy to see how well we can actually estimate harvest volume at forest management unit level, so at concession level, but also at AAC level. And here's an example of a work that shows how we are able to track different compartments of a larger concession through time, where you clearly see these different trajectories, that some of the compartments are locked in 2019, 2020, and somehow here only started. We start to see disturbances in 2020, 21, 22. It's probably logging roads being established, and then we see the logging effect, so the tree extraction. And we can also, we applied it across the Congo Basin, but this is actually work from Bart again, where we use the logging roads as a proxy to estimate harvest volumes across the Congo Basin concessions. And now a short summary and outlook. So I tried to show you that the high temporal and spatial detail of radar data really now improves our ability to assess fine-scale disturbances and also allow us to link with ground data. So there's really this gap closest between satellite observations. So 10 years ago, we still had Landsat or MODIS data, and the resolution of the data was so coarse that in situ data it was very hard to combine these data to address ecological questions. But that gap is closing very quickly, also with these intermediate layers from UAVs, drones that allow us to correlate field data with drone data, with satellite data versus these intermediate layers. And that data also allowed us to expose the spatial and temporal complexity of fine-scale disturbances and human forest activities. And if we have an outlook slide, so I really foresee that there will be much more radar-based forest research and applications to come by adding richer contextual detail, also through deep learning and foundation models. And this will allow us to address more ecological questions in the future. And with the now availability, so now we basically Sentinel-1 was our workhorse, but this year 2 new satellites, radar satellites were launched. So NISA, a US-Indian system, the first global coverage free and open L-band radar system, very similar to Sentinel-1 but L-band, and the P-band mission from European Space Agency. And now we will have very soon multi-frequency radar data available, that data sets that have a different sensitivity to different structural elements of forest, and through that we are quite confident that we can enhance the way we monitor biomass and forest structure dynamics. But all the work, so we do actually to empower forest users and protectors around the world. So those are actually the true champions that risk their life to protect forest, and without them our work would not be very useful. So they are the real champions of this whole work. And with that, I would like to thank you, and would like to invite everyone to reach out to us. We are very excited to collaborate and to learn. And here is actually a picture of Sentinel-1D, so the 4th Sentinel-1 satellite arriving in French Guiana in early September to be prepared for launch. And that's also I'm very excited about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. We've got a good 15 or so minutes for questions. We're very happy for people to either put their hands up and they can ask their question directly, or we'll also monitor the chat. I'll start with a quick question while we wait for the first one. You've been working heavily with C-band to detect these disturbances, and then we've got P-band going to come in through biomass. Are you going to be able to mesh those signals from P-band and C-band to quantify these biomass implications of different kinds of disturbances?
Yeah, we hope to do that. The issue with the biomass mission, it's not a monitoring mission, it's really an Earth Explorer mission. And we will get the full, so it will actually have repeat cycles of 9 months. And then you have every 9 months, you have like 4 or 5 Pol-INSAR images after each other, and then only comes back in 9 months. So it's not really a monitoring mission. It has a life cycle of 4 or 5 years, but of course we hope to doing it to looking actually to see how well we can correlate the P-band data combined with the C and the L-band data with forest data to see that even, these correlations we see with harvest volumes and harvest impact, whether we can improve them.
Great. Okay, well, we've got a couple of questions. First, Tom.
Thanks,
but it's not a monitoring tool, so that's what I'm interested in, is really building these, using the temporal aspect of the data. And for this, NISA actually will be much more useful, since it's a monitoring mission. It will also provide data every 6 till 12 days with a long wavelength, and that will then probably be the more useful data source for the type of work that I have more focused on in the past. But looking at forest structure, certainly P-band will be useful.
Thank you. Tom.
Thanks, Johannes. That was fantastic. So you combined kind of optical and different radars to look at kind of declines and drivers of kind of forest loss. Would it be possible to sort of flip that and look at use the combination of like optical and different types of radars to look at differences between kind of natural regeneration and restoration in forests?
Yeah, certainly, but this is, I know people that work on that. I think this is, if we look at restoration and forest regrowth, the longer wavelengths are much more useful, since the data we have used so far is saturates so quickly if it comes to subtle differences in biomass, C-band is not very useful. We're able to detect these large magnitude changes like a gap in a canopy, for example, but it's very hard with C-band to track subtle biomass increment, for example, because it saturates so quickly. But this is something where we're very hopeful, and we have seen we had L-band data and long wavelength radar data in the past, not operational and not very dense for the whole pantropics and not free. We have seen the potential of it and know that it's saturated, that it's much more useful to do these kind of things and also look in restoration and regrowth. And then combining it with optical data, I think multi-sensor approaches make a lot of sense.
Great. A question from John Healy.
Johannes, thank you so much for that very clear and very educational presentation. I was interested that you touched on using the methods to assess the sustainability of forest management for wood production. I was very pleased to see your results following up Fritz Kleinschrott's work of the reuse of logging roads, presumably rather than creating completely new ones, which I think might be an important contribution. What I'm going to ask is, apart from the potential application of your tools for law enforcement, regulation of illegal activity, to what extent you're picking up any willingness and enthusiasm from organizations that are trying to improve the sustainability of legal forest logging, be they certification bodies or even some of the better capitalized large logging companies. To what extent do you think they're with you in making best use of this technology to actually improve performance?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very, very important point. We're not just here to, identify unsustainable or illegal activities. It's also selective logging, as you said, if done well, and a lot of companies try their best to do it well. It's a very sustainable way, and it protects forest. And we see that, for example, wildlife and some of the FSC concessions much more present than in non-protected forest or non-managed forest. And we have a strong link through that, not direct. I don't have it directly, but through the work we're doing with the Nature Conservancy, and they have a lot of work with logging concessions, implementing sustainable logging as an alternative for clear cutting, and trying to use sustainable logging as an income source. So through them, there's a lot of work. So the logging road work and a lot of the logging impact work, so estimating harvest volumes, is done together with the Nature Conservancy. And the output of this is then used through their teams. The teams in the Congo Basin have already used it to work together with some of the forest concessions they work with. But I don't have more detail about that. But that's an important part there, because that working together with the Nature Conservancy has really also shifted for us, not being ecologist myself. I'm a geographer, the view on logging and forest management, that it is very positive if done well. And it's maybe one of the few alternatives to other land management that are much more destructive. So it's by far not all unsustainable or illegal. It's actually a very good way of managing and protecting our forest if done well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We got a question from Bill Lionheart.
Hi, hello. So I'm a mathematician. I work on inverse problems in imaging. But
now I'm scared.
So I just recently started getting interested in remote sensing for forests, and I like the idea that you're combining data from multiple sources and you're making inferences like labeling. I just wanted to check what sort of mathematical techniques you're using for combining the data from different sources.
That's a good question, but a very broad question, since there's so many ways we combine different data streams. If we provide, for example, the example where we provide the rud alerts and biomass data, and the biomass product comes actually with a location-specific uncertainty estimate, and our comes with more regional uncertainty estimates, and that is, I forgot the method, but we work together with Sietse Brown, who's a statistician in our group, so that I wouldn't be able to, I need to go back to the paper to see in which way those uncertainties were propagated. So that's more uncertainty propagation of these. But then there's many other ways we combine the data at the algorithm level, where, for example, a deep learning model, where we feed different data streams in a deep learning model, and that's not so straightforward. And basically, there is more a product that comes out of these uncertainties. For example, detected logging roads, and we through a validation, and a stratified sampling to get unbiased estimates of the accuracies. With roads, it was very difficult, so because we basically assessed length of road in smaller areas, since you can't do point-based estimation of accuracy, how you do it for other wall-to-wall products. So that was quite an effort to do that. In the review process also was addressed. It was a lot of work. So there's different ways of how we combine things, but
lovely. Maybe you could put me in touch with your statistician. So
yes, please, please reach out. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. Lovely talk.
Yeah.
Great. We've got a question online, and then there's another question with a mic. So from James Ball, incredibly impressive range of work. Well done. What was the ground truth data for training and validating the model to identify fine scale drivers?
Yeah. So the fine scale drivers, basically, it was manually, more or less manually labeled. So what we basically did is the basis was the integrate alert. So we had already the extent of the disturbances. So what we basically did is we used high resolution planet data to identify which alert events belong to certain drivers. It was manually labeling, and then an active learning process. So there was no in situ data used. It was high resolution satellite data used to basically label, okay, that event is a road, that event is tree extraction, this is flooding, this is fire. It's quite straightforward for the direct drivers, it's quite straightforward because you immediately see it. For the one slide, I showed the work from Robert Masolele, who looks at follow-up land use and commodities, that there is a heavy in situ data used that was provided through different countries, through CIATs, through many organizations working in Africa and collecting data on cocoa, palm, all kinds of these commodities. That's much harder. You don't really see that sometimes from the satellite data.
Right.
In particular, if it's agroforestry, it's hard.
We've got a question from Hannah Roger-Amies.
Well, we're going to use...
That's a bad idea.
Well, while we wait for the technical, James says thank you.
We're going to try this one, but the microphone is bad. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you for talking about the radar, because everyone just keeps saying the radar is hard. So, so this kind of shed a little bit more light, but it even seems impressive that you got so many products out of it. I'm curious, you mentioned them at the end. Have you looked into any of the up-and-coming foundation models that are combining multiple sources, and whether they are able to detect things that you're able to see just by looking at radar? We have one that we're working in Cambridge that's we call it Tessera, that's combining Sentinel-1 and 2, and then Google has one. Those are the two that I've used, but we focus mostly on validating with optical data. So yeah, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have started with a student, with my colleague Mark Rusworm, who's more deep learning AI person in our group, to look at that, but I'm still waiting for like a temporal foundation model, because so far they're all annual or static, and the work we are doing, you need, even if you have an annual product, a lot of the signal is mixed. If it's selective logging, for example, then in a foundation model you have, if you just mix it, you have either 50% logging signal, 50% no logging signal, and a year later a lot of the signal has already disappeared. So it's very hard with these annual foundation models to look at selective logging. At least that's the first assessment we did. So the answer is we have started a little bit of work. I don't really have a very good answer, but it would be great. I think in the future, if we have, for example, a monthly foundation model, that is something, but that's then you go into monitoring. I'm not sure whether that will be produced ever, but probably it will. So I have little experience. We have some experience. We have started with it, but I'm excited to learn more about it.
Because things recover quickly and then the signal is gone. Okay.
In
It's
the
just
moment
a blink in time in an annual.
Yeah, an annual is a little bit not sufficient for some of the processes we look at.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we're going to leave the questioning there. Before we say a final thank you to Johannes, just to announce that the next speaker in the first Thursday of November will be Adriani Esquivel-Muelber. She has just joined the faculty at Cambridge, actually, and she does some fantastic work on tropical forest monitoring in the context of large trees and their growth and mortality. So we look forward to that. And once again, Johannes, that was such a thought-provoking talk. Thank you so much. It was great to see all of your work. So once again, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for everyone that joined and for the nice questions. And I'm very much hope that we can establish some collaboration with some of you. That would be exciting.
There we go.
Please reach out.
Yeah, and Johannes' talk will be uploaded on the website in the next days as well. So if you want to revisit it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. See you all in a month's time. And Johannes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care. Goodbye. See you, Fabio.